Imagine you're a Roman emperor commanding legions across vast territories. Yet every morning you wake up and practice dying. Not literally, of course, but Marcus Aurelius, one of history's most powerful rulers, spent time each day contemplating his own mortality. Why would someone at the peak of human achievement do this? Today, we're diving into one of Stoicism's most fascinating practices: how ancient philosophers prepared for death, and why this seemingly morbid exercise might be the key to living your best life. Buckle up. We're about to discover why thinking about death could be your ultimate life hack. What is Memento Mori? Picture this. You're walking through ancient Rome, and everywhere you look, there are skulls carved into buildings, paintings of skeletons at dinner parties, and jewelry shaped like tiny coffins. Welcome to Memento Mori, literally meaning remember you must die. But here's where it gets interesting. The Stoics weren't obsessed with death because they were depressed. They were obsessed with death because it made them incredibly alive. Seneca, the wealthy advisor to Emperor Nero, would regularly practice what he called premeditatio malorum, imagining loss, including his own death. He'd spend entire days living as if he were poor, sleeping on the floor, eating simple bread. Think of it like a mental simulation. Just as pilots practice emergency landings in flight simulators, Stoics practiced life's ultimate emergency, mortality itself. The science behind death meditation. Now, before you think this is just ancient philosophical mumbo-jumbo, modern neuroscience has something fascinating to say about this practice. When we regularly contemplate mortality, our brains undergo what researchers call terror management. This activates the prefrontal cortex, the same region responsible for long-term planning and emotional regulation. Studies show that people who engage in mortality salience exercises, thinking about death, actually become more focused on meaningful goals and less concerned with trivial social status. It's like your brain suddenly realizes, wait, I don't have infinite time to waste on drama and meaningless pursuits. Dr. Sheldon Solomon's research found that contemplating death makes people more generous, more creative, and ironically, happier. The Stoics discovered this psychological hack 2,000 years before we had brain scanners. Marcus Aurelius and the Death Meditation. Let's time travel to 180 CE. Marcus Aurelius sits in his tent on the Germanic frontier, surrounded by maps of military campaigns. But instead of planning his next conquest, he's writing in his personal journal. You came from nothing and will return to nothing. What have you lost? He writes. This wasn't the ramblings of a depressed ruler. This was the most powerful man in the world deliberately reminding himself that his power, his wealth, even his life were temporary. Every morning, Marcus would practice what Stoics called the view from above, imagining himself from the perspective of the cosmos, seeing his problems as tiny specks in the vastness of time and space. Picture this mental exercise. You zoom out from your current worry, past your city, your country, your planet, until you're viewing Earth from the edge of the galaxy. Suddenly, that argument with your coworker seems pretty insignificant, doesn't it? This wasn't escapism, it was perspective training. By regularly confronting the reality of death, Marcus freed himself from the anxiety of clinging too tightly to temporary things. Seneca's practical death exercises. While Marcus philosophized about cosmic perspective, Seneca got practical. Really practical. Every evening, Seneca would perform what he called the daily review, but with a twist. He wouldn't just reflect on the day's events. He would live each evening as if it were his last. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, he would remind himself. But here's where Seneca got creative. He developed exercises that sound almost like science fiction scenarios. Exercise 1, the last day simulation. Seneca would spend entire days acting as if they were his final 24 hours. He'd say goodbye to loved ones, forgive old grudges, and focus only on what truly mattered. Exercise 2. The possession reset. Once a month, he'd give away his finest clothes and jewels, then live simply for several days. This taught him that he could lose everything and still be okay. Exercise 3. The legacy letter. He'd write letters to be read after his death, clarifying his values and expressing love for family and friends. The result? When Seneca was eventually ordered to take his own life by Emperor Nero, historical accounts describe him as remarkably calm. He had been preparing for this moment his entire philosophical life. Epictetus and the freedom and mortality. Now let's meet perhaps the most hardcore practitioner of death preparation, Epictetus. Born a slave, he understood impermanence in ways that privileged philosophers could only imagine. Epictetus had a radical insight. He realized that the fear of death was actually the fear of losing control. But here's the plot twist. We never had control in the first place. You are not your body, he would teach his students. You are not your possessions. You are not even your reputation. You are your capacity to choose your response to whatever happens. Imagine you're playing a video game where the only thing you control is your character's attitude and decisions. Everything else, the challenges, the other players, even when the game ends, is determined by the program. This was Epictetus's revolutionary insight. Death preparation wasn't about morbid fascination. It was about identifying what truly belonged to you, your thoughts, values, and choices, versus what was always temporary anyway. He would tell his students, practice saying goodbye to everything every day, not because you're pessimistic, but because you're a realist. And in that realism, you'll find incredible freedom. The liberation effect. So why does preparing for death actually liberate us? The answer lies in what psychologists now call anxiety of attachment. Think about your worst fears right now. Losing your job, being rejected, failing at something important. At the root of each fear is the anxiety of losing something you're attached to. But here's the Stoic insight that sounds almost like a cheat code for life. If you regularly practice mentally letting go of everything, including life itself, you become immune to most forms of psychological suffering. It's not that you stop caring, it's that you start caring about different things. You stop wasting energy protecting temporary stuff and start investing in eternal things: wisdom, virtue, love, and meaningful contribution. Imagine you're carrying a heavy backpack full of rocks. Each rock represents something you're afraid to lose. Now imagine setting that backpack down. The relief you feel, that's what daily death preparation does for your mind. Steve Jobs, interestingly, used a very Stoic practice. He would look in the mirror each morning and ask, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I'm about to do today? This wasn't morbid, it was clarifying. It helped him distinguish between what mattered and what was just noise. Modern applications. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds great for ancient philosophers, but how do I apply this without becoming depressed or scaring my friends? Here are 3 practical exercises you can start today, adapted for modern life. Exercise 1, the 5-year reset. Once a week, imagine you have exactly 5 years left to live. What would you change about how you spend your time? Who would you call? What would you stop worrying about? Exercise 2, the gratitude countdown. Each evening, list 3 things you experienced that day as if you were reviewing them for the last time. Notice how this changes your attention to small moments. Exercise 3, the legacy question. Regularly ask yourself, if I died tomorrow, what would people remember about how I treated them and what I contributed? These aren't designed to make you morbid. They're designed to make you intentional. Tech entrepreneur Tim Ferriss practices a version of this by regularly asking, what would this look like if it were easy? But the Stoics asked an even more powerful question: What would this look like if it didn't matter whether I succeeded or failed? Because I've already made peace with losing everything. The ultimate freedom. Here's the beautiful paradox the Stoics discovered. By accepting death, they became truly alive. By practicing loss, they learned to appreciate what they had. By contemplating endings, they learned to value beginnings. Modern anxiety often comes from treating temporary things as permanent and permanent things as temporary. We stress about social media likes as if they'll matter in 100 years, while neglecting relationships that could outlast our lifetimes. Death preparation flips this script. It helps you invest your limited time and energy in things that align with your deepest values, regardless of external outcomes. Think of it this way. If you knew you had exactly 1 year left to live, would you spend it arguing on social media, climbing corporate ladders for prestige, or accumulating stuff you can't take with you? Probably not. You'd focus on love, meaningful work, personal growth, and positive impact. You'd become more generous with forgiveness and more selective with your attention. The Stoics realized you don't have to wait for a terminal diagnosis to live this way. You can choose this perspective today. So here's your challenge. Future philosopher. For the next week, try one simple practice. Each morning, before checking your phone or jumping into your day, spend 2 minutes imagining this is your last week on Earth. Not in a morbid way, but in a clarifying way. What becomes important? What becomes trivial? How do you want to show up for the people in your life? The Stoics discovered that preparing for death isn't about becoming comfortable with dying. It's about becoming comfortable with living fully without the constant anxiety of losing what was never permanent anyway. Remember Marcus Aurelius' words. It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. Death preparation breaks the spell. It reminds you that other people's opinions, social status, and material possessions are all temporary. But wisdom, kindness, and the impact you have on others, those ripple forward long after you're gone. Start today. Not because you're pessimistic about life, but because you're optimistic about what you can become when you stop being afraid of losing what you never really owned in the first place. The Stoics weren't preparing to die, they were preparing to live without fear. And that, my friends, is the ultimate liberation.